Welcome back. I'm sorry it's been a couple of days since my last video, but our kids went back to school just a couple of days ago, so we've had a couple of pretty busy days. But 2 or 3 days before they went back to school, my son beat me in an over-the-board game. And he hadn't played chess in 2 or 3 weeks, so that was pretty startling. And I wish I could go through that game in this video, but we didn't record the moves on paper and nobody was videoing it, so we don't remember exactly what all the moves were. But he got so confident after beating me that he challenged everybody in the house to a full-on back-to-school tournament. Now, if you're new here, none of us are titled players, none of us have any official ratings. I'm just a random middle-aged person trying to get better at chess, and I try to spread that through the rest of my family. But at my son's request, we went ahead and organized a tournament. We each played each other, and there's 4 of us, so that means a total of 6 games, and the 2 with the most points would go on to play against the championship. Now, we did record all the moves for all of these games, so I'm just going to take you through them. Some of them are more interesting than others, and I'll try to move quickly. If you're wondering about the abbreviation up there in the title, that's the first annual Fry Family Back to School Classic, which is what we collectively decided to call it. Now, this is the first game, which featured my son playing with the white pieces and my wife playing with the black pieces. This was the shortest of all the games that I'm going to show you, and I'll just take you through pretty quickly. They played an actual opening up to about here, which I believe is the Italian game, and it went so far as to get both knights out, which kind of surprised me that both my wife and my son played correct moves out to this point, or at least book moves, but then both of them started to make multiple mistakes and blunders, as you will see very quickly. That was a blunder, mistake, blunder, blunder, mistake. Now here the engine is recommending D3 or F4. I'm not sure what F4 does. I think obviously D3 would allow this dark squared bishop to come out here where it can pin that knight to the queen. But instead my son put his queen on F3. My wife fianchettoed the bishop, which turns out to be a blunder. And I'm not sure why, but the engine is recommending queen to G3 at this point. I don't know that I would have found that move either because I'm not sure what it's aiming at. I guess it's putting 2 pieces on this G6 pawn. I'm not sure. I consider myself better at chess than the rest of the members of my family, which may be true most of the time, except for the game I mentioned in which my son beat me, but I don't understand all of these moves. But my son took the pawn with his knight before moving the queen over there, so maybe he was looking at that, kind of like the engine, he just forgot to move the queen over first. And of course my wife should take back, and she did. And here the eval bar gives my wife a bigger and bigger advantage, but when my son moved this knight back here, I was wondering what his idea was, but I soon found out what his idea was. It was to get out of the way of the queen and the bishop being able to get onto this diagonal. It's not a spoiler, this game's going to be over pretty soon. I'm not sure why he put the knight over there, where it could immediately be challenged, but here his plan becomes more and more obvious. He drops this bishop back, which turns out to be a mistake. He's down -9 at this point, according to the engine, but my wife didn't see what he was planning. I started to suspect at this point. She played there to challenge the rook, and he blocked the bishop's attack by moving the knight back, which not only got it out of trouble from that pawn, but keeps the bishop from coming down through here. I have no idea why, but my wife moved a rook up to H5, and again, as I suspected, my son was planning on moving his queen over here, but then it wouldn't be protecting this knight anymore, so he decided to do something about that. He played C4, which I thought was pretty smart. It wasn't a great move. He's still down -7, but it keeps the bishop from pointing at the knight. And even though the engine counts this move as a mistake, I can kind of see what was going on here. She's wanting to get that pawn out of the way, but he just took it, which allows the bishop to come over here. And he decided he didn't care about the knight because he figured she didn't see his plan. So he went ahead and moved the queen over there. Now, of course, that gives up the knight. And after that, it gives up the exchange with the bishop on this rook. But he's playing hope chess at this point, which sometimes works at the lower ratings. To my wife's credit, she did see the free knight and she took it. And instead of going about with his plan for just a second, which he can't do because the bishop is still guarding that square, he moved his rook out of danger, which was pretty good. But again, he's still down -9. Now the best move for black here, according to the engine, is to put this knight in here, where it would be protected by a pawn and guard this bishop. But my wife brought the bishop out of danger that way, which allowed my son to play this, which is what he had been planning all along when he brought the queen over there. As you saw, he's had this plan for a little while, I think. At least it looked like it watching this game. And of course, these 2 pieces are lined up with F7, and he's down -9. What black needs to play here is queen to E7, which would guard that spot, or bishop to E6, which would blunt the queen's attack and prevent it from getting to F7. But instead, my wife played there to attack the queen, which under many circumstances probably wouldn't be bad. It's a fork. She's up 5 points of material, so even if the queen got out of danger and she traded for the bishop, it would benefit her. But she didn't see that the mate was coming and he played it. So even though he just blundered and mistaked all the way down to -9 or worse at some points, I do commend him for having a plan. And as I said, this was the shortest of all the games that we played at 18 moves, and he did checkmate his mother on the 18th move. Let's go on to the second game. The second game was between my daughter and I. My daughter had the white pieces and I had the black pieces. She opened with e4 and I played the Caro-Kann defense. She gave an interesting response to it, but that turns out to actually be a book move. So I played d5 as I'm supposed to. And here she's supposed to take with the e-pawn, and I'm going to take back, and she's going to take back. That's what normally happens because I have been in this position before, but I think my daughter didn't know what to do here, so she played g4, which was a little bit of a surprise to me. I am supposed to take that e-pawn in the middle, so I did. And knight to c3 is white's best move here, but instead my daughter played a4. And at this point I began to suspect she just wanted to push all her pawns to the 4th rank. And I had no idea what to do because, of course, in all my studies of the Caro-Kann defense, I've never made it to this position, so I just played e5, which did turn out to be my best move according to the engine. And I'm not sure why my daughter didn't play this next pawn to the 4th rank, but she played it to the 3rd rank, I guess challenging this front pawn. It is my best move to take it, and I did. And of course, she can take back here with either the bishop or the queen. I'm still going to have a -6 or so advantage, but she can play either one of those. And in fact, it'll be just as good for her if she plays knight to c3 here, but she didn't. She moved another pawn, and it turns out that bishop to b4 check is my best move here, but I didn't see that. I played one of my top moves, which was to protect that front pawn in case the bishop at some point did decide to attack it. I'm still up about -9. There was some inaccuracies. That turned out to be my only mistake of the game. What I should have played here instead is either queen to h4 check or bishop to b4 check. I think the reason the queen to a5 check doesn't work is because the bishop or the knight or the queen could just block that one. But yeah, I should have checked immediately here with one of these two moves. But even after taking that, I'm still up about -7 or -8. And my daughter continued not developing any pieces by playing another pawn move. And I finally saw bishop to b4 check, which is still my best move. I'm up about -10 here. Daughter has several legal moves here, and she played the best one. And queen to h4 check is still my best move, but if you've been following me for very long, you know that I have trouble seeing some of these diagonals. I don't know why I didn't see that. It seems like it would have been fairly obvious, but I played my second best move, which was to push that pawn forward. I have 2 pieces defending that square, and her best move at this point is to get this bishop out here to a3. If she had done that, I probably just would have taken it, traded off the 2 bishops there. But Stockfish says if she had played bishop to a3, my best move then would have been queen to h4 check. Again, I don't know if I would have seen that or not, but instead my daughter took that pawn with the queen, which it only counted as an inaccuracy. I'm surprised. I thought that would have counted as a blunder, but maybe because I'm already so far ahead that it didn't count it as that bad of a move, because according to the computer's point of view, there's not much she could have done anyway. If it had been me, I would have tried to save that queen somehow, and I probably wouldn't have found bishop to a3. I probably would have put the bishop there on the previous turn, but it still would have been better than taking that pawn with the queen, I think. It is her best move to take that bishop here, so she did. I'm not going to take back because the knight guards that square, and again, I'm supposed to play queen to h4 check, but I played my second best move, which was queen to d4 check. Her best move is to block with the bishop, and my best move is to take the free rook, so I did. Now here she needs to start getting some of these other pieces out of the way, like moving the knight here would protect that bishop and get it off the back rank. Maybe at some point she could take this pawn and then have a rook pointed over this way, but instead she decided to take a king walk, so that's what she did. I'm a little surprised here. The computer says my best move is actually to play h5, but my second best move is to take that knight, so I took it. And here she's supposed to protect this bishop from attack by taking my pawn, and then of course the rook would protect the bishop at that point. But she'd already decided to go on a king walk, so there she went. I did take the bishop. I'm up -27 at this point. And the rest of the game was a matter of me trying to be careful. Like the bishop there is protecting that knight, and so I had to be careful with my queen, but I decided to get some of my other pieces out because, as you can see, my queen was the only piece that was down there, and it's kind of on the opposite side of the board. But I finally got the queen out here into the action, and computer says I have mate in 6 depending on how I play it. g5 is my best move, but I played the second best move, which is here. The problem with that, of course, is that it allows the king to escape back around this way. But I guess my daughter didn't know that because she went this way, which allows mate in 3. If I take the bishop first, which I did, And now it's made into if she'll play king to h4, but instead she played king to f5, which allows mate in one several different ways. The engine says g6 is checkmate. I don't know that I would have seen this, but knight to c5 is checkmate because that's a discovered check from this bishop. Knight to e5 would have been checkmate, discovered check from the bishop. I didn't find those. I found this one, which turned out to be checkmate. So this was the second shortest game of the tournament, and the next game was between my son and I, so let's just go to that one now. In this one, I had the white pieces. My son had the black pieces. According to the game review on Lichess, it said this was the most perfect game of all the games that were played in this tournament, as far as combined accuracy and combined or average center-pawn loss between both players. Now, you'll see a couple of moves in this game that will cast that into doubt, but the engine is more knowledgeable about chess than I am. I did open with e4, and my son responded with e5. I got my knight out, he got his knight out, and I have been playing the Italian game in most of my games recently, but here I decided to try the Ruy Lopez, so that's what I played. And my son did not respond with any of the recommended stockfish moves here, nor any of the very common moves in the opening books that I looked at on Lichess. He put his bishop out on b4. The stockfish says I should immediately challenge that with c3, which I think makes a lot of sense. Not only would I want to play that eventually if the opponent challenged me with this pawn and I had to move my bishop back and then they moved the other pawn, then I could slide this bishop back in here. But of course, it immediately threatens the bishop. I decided to just go ahead and castle because I've been trying to stick with opening principles, especially in openings where I don't know all the ins and outs. And even if I did know the opening, his last move wasn't one of the 12 most common moves, so I wouldn't have been prepared for that anyway. But in hindsight, c3 does look like an obvious move. I castled. Here the engine recommends getting this knight out to e7 in preparation for black castling. And then, of course, I would play c3 on the next turn. And I'm not sure why this is counted as inaccurate, but he did get a knight out in preparation to castle. Now, this time I did see that this pawn was under fire. If you've been following along, you know that I'm unfamiliar with the e4 positions to some extent, and I often miss the fact that that knight on f6 is attacking this pawn. But this time I did see it. The engine says the best thing I can do about it is just to play rook to e1 to protect that pawn. c3 is also okay, or I can just go ahead and take here on c6. I think the reason it wants me to take on c6 is because that, of course, leaves their e-pawn undefended, and then after they take back here, I will be able to take their e-pawn. Well, I didn't see that far forward, but I did play a move that I thought was going to protect this pawn. That was counted as a mistake, my only mistake of the game, and my son did what he was planning on doing, which is castling. c3 again is listed as my best move, but I played my second best move, which was to take the knight. My son didn't know that it's usually recommended to take with the outside pawn when you have a choice here. He took with the inside pawn to free up his queen, which I understand. But of course, when I took that knight, I left that e-pawn undefended. I don't know exactly what he was aiming at, but he put his queen on d4. Knight to f3 is my best move here. Of course, my knight is in danger. Putting it back where it came from would, of course, attack the queen. That's what I played. He's supposed to take it all the way back, but he only went halfway back, which turns out to be a blunder. Now, that's the only move that counted as a blunder for my son, and it gives me +7, +8 now. Stockfish says my best move is a3, but e5 is my second best move, and I see that now. That's just a clean pawn fork. It would pick up one of those pieces. It would be protected by my knight, but instead I played my third best move, which the engine has been wanting me to play all along, and that was c3. Now, I'm not sure exactly why, but Stockfish says black's best move is to play rook to d8. I guess that's because if I take the bishop after that, then this pawn is only defended by my queen and they can take it? I really don't know. It says if they played that, I would play e5, but of course I hadn't seen e5 yet. I expected at this point that my son would move his bishop back, and then I thought maybe I would develop some of these pieces to these squares. Because again, I was more concerned about just following opening principles and developing my pieces, but he played that, which wasn't counted as a blunder. Now, as we were playing the game on the board, I thought that was his blunder there, accidentally giving up his queen. He recognized it as soon as he let go of his piece. It is my best move to take it, so I did. Now here, of course, he is supposed to get his dark squared bishop out of danger, but I guess he hasn't fully internalized the point system that we use to value material over other material, and he may have thought this was an even trade, I'm not sure. But despite me being up +15 here, I had a little harder time winning this than I thought I would, because for the rest of the game, my son played among his top 2 or 3 best moves on almost every move. And I'll just take you through here without commenting on every single move, but it was not easy for me. Again, because he made those first few mess-ups, and then he just kept playing really good moves, except for the one you saw where I checked and he could have blocked with the rook, but he didn't, so I got that other rook. But after this, I just had to be very, very careful and get a rook over here, and then that's checkmate. And the next game was between my wife and my daughter, and it was going on at the same time as I was playing my son. So there was no outside arbiter or referee watching their game. But I did put my phone up to record all the moves so I would be able to put it on the board here. And I thought what I was going to do was just write those moves into a PGN file and upload it to the analysis board. The problem is I couldn't do that because some of their moves were illegal. I don't mean illegal like burglary or murder, I mean illegal like against the rules of chess. So the analysis boards here and the PGN files won't accept those illegal moves. So I'm going to have to show this one on the board editor. Let me switch screens. This is the board editor on Lichess, so when I move the pieces there won't be the clicking sound and there's not going to be an eval bar. My wife was playing with the white pieces, my daughter was playing with the black pieces. My wife opened with d4, and my daughter played h5. My wife, perhaps overhearing me talking about opening principles with my kids, took the full center with e4, and my daughter played g5. At this point I begin to suspect she wasn't that interested in actually playing chess on this day, even though she has been practicing over the summer. My wife played c4, which is probably what I would have played at this point in order to get the knight out behind it. My daughter played f5, and I don't know if it was her best move. I probably would have moved forward at this point, but my wife captured this pawn, like so. My daughter played e5, and my wife didn't know about en passant, so she took this way. And I don't know why my daughter didn't play d5 here. You'd think that would have been what she would play, but she did the same thing against my wife that she played against me when she needed to move a d-pawn, and she only moved it to the third rank. Well, her third rank from her perspective, so d6. My wife captured there, and my daughter made her first capture of the game, which was to take that pawn with her c-pawn. Since nobody has developed any pieces yet, I guess my wife decided not to and played b4. My daughter played b6. My wife played a4, and my daughter played a5. And here we had capture on a5 twice. And then instead of moving one of her 3 remaining unmoved pawns, my wife moved one of her pieces for the first time and took this pawn here on g5, which of course can be taken back. My daughter did not take back. She played rook to h6, which of course can just be taken, but I think I would probably take the queen here. But my wife took the rook, and the knight captured back. My wife developed her other bishop, perhaps to protect this pawn, which was under fire. And my daughter played rook to a6, knight to c3, queen to d7, knight to d5. Perhaps aiming for a royal fork over here on f6. I don't know if she saw that coming, but my daughter played queen to f7, so she's not worried about the fork anymore. My wife thought she saw a fork on the other side and played knight to c7 check, which of course hits these 2 pieces. And my daughter played her best move in this position, which was just to take that with her queen. My wife got her queen out here. I'm not sure why she didn't go all the way and check. My daughter played queen to b6. Here we saw rook to a3, and then queen to b2. When she picked up her queen and started moving it down that file, when I was watching this on the video, I strongly suspected she was going to go here and lose her queen. Not that my wife necessarily would have taken it, but she stopped right here, which isn't bad. It threatens the rook. My wife played f6 here, and I thought my daughter was going to take the rook, but instead she slid in here to check, which is of course a fork of the king and the rook. It wasn't her only legal move, but my wife blocked the check with her queen, and my daughter captured the queen. And here it is, the only legal move to take back. My daughter moved her rook over, perhaps knowing that rooks belong on open files, and my wife played f4. We saw rook to b2, we saw h4, and maybe because she wanted to say check again, my daughter put her rook on d2 and the king captured it. My daughter played d5 and my wife captured on d5. And my daughter finally realized that this rook has been hanging for a little while, so she captured it, and my wife checked down here on b5. My daughter could have blocked this in a couple of different ways, but instead she decided to block it here. And of course my wife captured it. I don't know if my daughter thought this was check, but she blocked it with her bishop, and of course my wife captured it, which is check, and my daughter finally had to move her king. I think if it had been me at this point, I just would have promoted this pawn, but instead my wife moved her bishop to c6, and here's where things got a little ridiculous, and why I need this board instead of the analysis board. At this point, my daughter forgot she was playing with the black pieces and played d6, which of course is an illegal move. Not only is it not her piece, but this pawn can't move that direction. Before my wife caught it, she already had her hand headed toward this rook and she played a3. Then my daughter said, wait, you're playing white? Oh, I can't move this pawn. So they agreed to move the pawn back to where it was, but my wife forgot to move back this rook. So that messes up the PGN file, and none of these websites will take a PGN that has illegal moves like that. So basically, my wife got an extra move here. So for the move she had made illegally and got taken away, my daughter played this move instead. And this rook to a3 would have been my wife's next turn, but because they didn't realize that they had already played that, my wife thought it was her turn, so she got an extra move in a row here. At this point, she did promote her pawn to a queen, which is a check. My daughter got out of check, and my wife put her in check again, and my daughter went back to f6, which of course is also check, but neither one of them noticed. So I guess my wife's plan here was to bring this rook over and come up this way with it, and she played this not realizing that this king was still in check. My daughter played knight to f5 to go after the rook, and that's when my wife noticed that she had been in check this whole time, so she made her take this move back, not realizing that her own move had been illegal. So my daughter played king to e6 here to get out of the check finally, and inexplicably my wife checked on d6, which of course can be taken two different ways, and my daughter took the queen. Honestly, at this point I was surprised she didn't just move out of check. My wife brought her rook down to g7, and my daughter played knight to f5 again. g3 was next. Of course, it is protected by the rook. I don't know if my wife knew that. And we got knight to d4. Rook to g6 check. King moves out of check. Bishop to f7 check. King to c5. Rook to g5 check. And here we had another illegal move, because my daughter played king to c4, which of course is still check from the bishop. But again, neither one of them noticed. My wife played knight to e2, apparently trying to trade off the knights, despite the opponent's king being in check. And instead of trading off the knights, my daughter played king to b3, which of course is still in check. And again, neither one of them noticed. My wife took the knight on d4. But now the king's in check from two different pieces. My daughter thought she was moving out of check and went to c4 again, which of course is still in check. My wife, thinking her knight was under attack, moved it away, even though the king is still in check. My daughter put the king back on b3, which is still in check. For a second, I thought we were going to get a repetition. When my wife checked here, I thought the king was going to go back this way. But instead, she went to b2 this time. My wife captured the pawn on h5, and we finally saw a check from the black bishop onto the white king. However, neither one of them realized that this was under check also, so my wife played knight to c6, attacking the bishop. The bishop saw that it was in danger, so it moved to c5. Now, at this point, my game at the other table ended, and so I was able to be the arbiter for the rest of this game, and both of them did try to make continuous illegal moves during the rest of the game, but I was there to stop them, so the rest of the moves here will be legal. My wife took the pawn on a5, my daughter played b1. We got bishop to g6 check, king to b2. Rook captures c5, king to a3, rook to c4 to protect the pawn, king to b2, bishop to d3, I guess to protect the rook even though it was already protected, king to a2, knight to b3, which of course is not protected, king to a2, bishop to b1, king to b2. And yes, you've noticed, neither one of those pieces is protected at this point. With the knight, I could understand a beginner thinking that maybe the pawn is protecting it pointing backwards, especially since earlier my daughter thought she had the white pawns moving this direction, but nothing's defending the bishop. Got rook to d4, king to a3, f5, king to b2, knight to a1, king to a3, f6, king to b2, f7, king to a3. My wife promoted to a queen, king to b2. Don't know why we didn't get a check here, but my wife played queen to c8, perhaps cutting off the king from the file that it couldn't go to anyway. King to a3. Now at this point I saw what I believed to be a maiden one, which is right here, queen to c3, because of course the rook cuts off those and the queen cuts off these, and the bishop cuts off that one. So I think that would have been mate. What my wife played instead was queen to b8, which of course is a stalemate. It doesn't leave the king any legal moves. The pawn is protected by the rook, the bishop protects this, and the queen cuts off all of these. So this game ended in a draw. The next game was between my son and my daughter, and I will just take you through it. We got that opening once again. It looked like my daughter was just going to do the pawn thing all the way through, but this turned out to be an actual opening called the Ware Defense, according to the opening book on Lead Chess. Already my son has a +2 advantage, but he started giving it away with a couple of inaccuracies. After d6, which was one of her better moves, my son blundered by taking the e-pawn, and my daughter blundered by not taking it back. My son blundered by checking out here on g7, which of course the bishop can just capture, but my daughter blundered by not capturing the knight. My son played his second best move here according to the engine. I'm not sure why it was counted as inaccurate. He's still at +7. And my daughter's best move here was just to move the king back, but instead she blocked with the knight. And my son blundered by playing queen to d3. My daughter blundered by playing this completely unnecessary move, and my son's best move isn't even to take it. Knight to d5 is his best move according to the engine. Queen to c4 is his next best move. And knight to e8 is his third best move. Now, I'll be honest, of those moves, I think the only one I understand is queen to c4, because it's threatening this knight, which is already hit by the bishop. It wouldn't quite be mate, but you might be getting close. But I don't know for sure what those two knight moves would do. The knight to d5, of course, would threaten the queen, and that's the best move, but since the queen would go to g5, and then you would take the... I don't know, that gets really complicated. I think I just would have taken the rook here, which is what my son did, but it was counted as a mistake. It is my daughter's best move to take back, and now it's my son's best move to take the free bishop. My daughter should probably take that knight over there on g7 again, but again, she didn't. Instead, put her rook there. I'm not sure why, but my son castled here. It was among his best moves listed by the engine. Not the best move, but it's never a horrible move to castle as long as there's not an immediate mate threat here, I guess. My daughter's supposed to take the knight, but instead she played a pawn forward. This was actually my son's best move here. It's a fork between the queen and the rook. Queen moved over. It's not his best move to take the rook. d4 is his best move here. d3 is his second best move. f4 is his third best move. I think I would have taken the rook at this point, which is what he did. And of course that knight is toast, so my daughter took the pawn, which was protected by the knight. It is his best move. My son took the queen with this knight. And the rest of the game, I think my son saw a way to get through there. He was just worried about those pawns for just a little bit, and he kind of forced that king back, and then after blocking, that's checkmate. So I was pretty proud of him for once he saw his opening, he went for it, despite a couple of early blunders that gave my daughter a little bit of an advantage. The final game of the first round was between my wife and I, and if I haven't mentioned it before, my wife almost never practices or plays chess. She just happens to be really smart, so she made some good moves during this game, but it was just from pure calculation due to her having a giant brain inside her skull, and the moves she missed is because she's completely unfamiliar with chess. But I should flip the board around because I was playing with the black pieces. There we go. Thought we were about to get an Nimzo Indian here. In fact, I was kind of surprised she had played this. I thought we were going to get this knight here, and then I was going to put my bishop there to pin it, which I've played several times, and I've done okay with it, not spectacularly. But instead here, my wife messed up by playing b4. It is my best move to take it with check, so I did. And of course, she's supposed to block here with either the bishop or the knight on d2, but instead she blocked with knight to c6. And of course, I am supposed to take it, which would be a fork of the king and the rook, so I castled. In hindsight, it was glaringly obvious that I should have taken that knight. In fact, when I was going through this game here on the analysis board for the first time, I thought, oh, and in my next move, I'll take that knight, but I castled instead. Best move for white is to put the bishop there to break the pin on that knight and also to protect it, but instead my wife went to pin my knight. Now, of course, I'm supposed to take that one on c3, so I protected my bishop with a pawn move. Well, now you can get this rook out of danger, like there, to c1 and protect this. But I actually have a -7 advantage at this point, even if she plays that. But she took here, which is a mistake, and I'm not even supposed to take back. I'm still supposed to take this knight, because now the only thing that can block that check is the queen. Well, I didn't see that yet. I took this bishop. Now, the best move for white is to put this queen on b3, which not only threatens the bishop, not really because the pawn's there, but it protects the knight. And if this pawn ever gets disappeared somehow, then the bishop would be hanging at that point. But my wife threatened the bishop with the rook, which still allows me to take the knight. And I finally saw it, so I took it. That forces the queen to block, and I get the queen for the bishop and removes the opponent's right to castle. My best move was to take that pawn with check, which I did. King was actually supposed to go back to its home square at this point, but the second best move is to come here, which allows me to take the other pawn with check. This was actually my wife's best move. And I'm supposed to start developing other pieces at this point, but I got a pawn out instead. And now the rook challenges my queen, so I am able to sidestep and with a check. King has to move out of check. I'm supposed to check again, according to the engine here, but instead I brought another pawn forward. I was starting to see these pieces that needed to be developed at this point. I knew I can't checkmate with just this queen, so I was getting those pawns out of the way so I could develop these pieces and bring my rook. I expected this as the next move. It was one of her best. It's a discovered attack on my queen, and of course the bishop's guarded by the rook. I'm actually supposed to check here, according to the engine, but instead I got my queen out of danger, which seemed prudent at the time. Then I checked there on f5. It was blocked with the pawn, so I took the pawn. And it was a matter of hunting down, but again, just like with my son, after a couple of early blunders, my wife began to play some pretty good moves. I would say in most cases here, she was playing among her top 2 moves. But because I already had such an advantage, it was difficult for her to do anything at this point. I just had to coordinate my pieces, be careful not to stalemate, which means keep checking or make sure they'll have a legal move after you move. And of course, I got all my pieces coordinated here in the middle, missed a few pawns that she could take, and then it wasn't that difficult. Again, just having to be very, very careful, and at this point, I had mate. So if you're keeping track, my wife and my daughter each finished this first round of the tournament with half a point due to their draw against each other and losing the rest of their games. My son finished with 2 full points for beating both my wife and my daughter, and I finished with 3 full points, having beaten everybody. That meant my son and I had the most points, so we went on to the championship game. Now for that one, my son did insist on using the clock, So I decided not to write down the moves. I decided to film the game with my cell phone. And because it went pretty quickly, I thought it might be interesting for you to actually watch that game. We're going to transition to that in just a second. I did, for the first time, try to put the board above the board, like a digital board above the physical board, overlapping, like you see all the famous chess streamers doing. I don't know how they do that when they have an in-person game that's on camera, and then they put the digital board up there. I don't know if they go through and play that game later and try to match up the times and make a screen recording of that and then overlay it. So what I just did was took screenshots of the positions on the board and then put them up there. But hopefully that'll be clear for if you can't see the actual moves on the board due to the glare or something like that. But anyway, enjoy this game. And if I feel like it, I might talk over parts of it. And then I'll see you again for the closing. Okay, here we are. And you can see from the thermometer in the background that it's 104 degrees outside. All right, my son played e4 and hit the clock. I think the clock was a little distracting to him. I played the Caro-Kann defense. And we played book moves out just a little bit. Even to here is a book move, believe it or not. I'm not necessarily supposed to advance the pawn here, but that's what I decided to do since his knight looked like it was just asking for it. And he'd be fine if he played knight to e2, but he left the knight there, and that was his first blunder of the game. Again, I think he was obsessed with playing quickly and hitting that clock. And here when he challenged my bishop and I took his other knight, he was supposed to take with the queen, but he messed up the pawn structure by taking with the pawn. Now he does have a mass of pawns in the center, but he's a piece down. And that was another blunder right there because he just hung the bishop. He probably should have pushed that pawn to a4 first and then moved the bishop out to trade or something like that. Here, knowing that I was ahead 2 pieces already, I just decided to take that pawn. I'm not sure if it was the best once again. I do like that he plays with a lot of confidence, but he's pretty easily distracted by things like the clock or other people in the room. I moved that bishop back because it looked like he could take down there on g7, but instead he was aiming at my other pawn.
The disaster thing?
He likes to check whether or not it's good. And I decided I could help get my bishop out with that queen trade and then castle. That actually was one of his better moves to move that bishop out there. And he attacked my knight with the pawn. So he has some good instincts. I just think he would probably be better than me at chess if he would just practice and study a little bit, but he has a hard time. I am challenging that undefended bishop there, so he got it out of danger. If I remember right, the engine said his best move was to castle at that point to protect that bishop. I went after his center pawn, which he could have protected by moving his d pawn, but instead he moved his other one, just giving it up, allowing me to point my bishop down there at f2. And here he did castle, which allowed me to take his h-pawn. With check. And I got my knight to safety by checking again. Sorry about that little bit of glare there in the middle of the board. The phone kept adjusting how bright and dark it was going to be and kept losing focus, but now I have 2 knights pointed at his e-pawn, which is still undefended. He could have defended it earlier, but he didn't. So I took the pawn. He decided to trade off for that knight. And of course, my other knight's in position to take it, so I don't have to mess up my pawn structure, although I probably could have and would have been okay. I do sometimes struggle in positions like this, where I know I'm ahead, but I'm not sure exactly how to proceed. So once again, I just practiced being careful, making sure my pieces were defended. And here I was preparing for a discovered check when I got the knight out of the way, but he saw that coming and moved his king ahead of time. But that allowed me to fork the rook and the king. Yeah, there he moved into check and had to move somewhere else. That allowed me to take the rook, which I think I was actually supposed to take with my other rook, but I figured we would trade off either way. And this is an inaccuracy, at least on my part. because he ended up having to block with the pawn once he figured out his only legal move was to play c3, and now I realized both my pieces were hanging.
On my part. Dude.
Yeah, so I had to give up my bishop for the pawn in order to protect the rook. Getting my other rook into the action, he came after my rook there on the first rank, so I moved it over to hit that pawn. I would have allowed him to resign here. Even though I normally don't let him resign, I make him play it out, so he just got in the habit of playing it out, and that's what he's doing here.
Okay, I'm trying to think if I'm safe here, because I'm number 17 now.
Yeah, there's that glare again, but that's what the diagram is for, so you can see what the actual moves are. There I was stopping the advance of the pawn. He didn't have a lot of legal moves in this position, but here I can take the pawn with check, and it's just a few moves from mate. Not much he can do.
Check.
We thought that was mate for just a second,
No, that's mate.
and so we shook hands,
Sure.
but then we
Check.
checked the board and realized that he could move to f5.
Oh no, sorry. Wait.
Okay, so he waited for me to start the clock again and moved to f5.
I had to pause the check. Okay, good, good. Now,
And then, of course, it is mate in one. I just had to be careful.
let's bring this home.
We're at a castle?
Pretty sure that's mate.
And that was the championship game of our first annual Fry Family Back to School Classic. Thank you for watching.
Yeah.
If you made it this far in the video, I really do appreciate it. I had a lot of fun in the tournament, but it was a lot of work to make this video and to put all these games together, make all the PGN files so I could upload them to the analysis boards, and of course to make all the screenshots to go over that last game. So again, I really do appreciate it if you made it this far. And I really wish that I could have put the game on a video that my son played me a night or two before this tournament, where he checkmated me. But that's the downside of playing over the board if you don't record your moves or don't record it on video so you can look at it later. So I promised my son that anytime we play in the future, I will record the moves or at least put it on video or something, because he does beat me sometimes, and I need to figure out why and how, what mistakes I'm making so I can correct that, but also because I want to give him the credit that he deserves. As you saw in this tournament, he had no trouble, pretty quick games against my wife and my daughter. And in the games against me, he had a couple of early blunders and then played really good moves, defending really well for the most part after that. But thank you to all three of them for participating, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.